The book of Judges, session number 40. And we are still in chapter 8. We ended where the son of Gideon was just too young, and the enemy was then eventually destroyed by Gideon's own hand. Just exactly as God said in the previous chapters, I will give Midian in your hand, Gideon. It's interesting to see that in verse 21, Gideon then arose and he slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. It's quite typical of these pagan kings to even put golden chains and very precious jewelry around their camels' necks. We see in verse 26 that the chains that were around the camels' necks was given to Gideon as like a reward for what he's done. Because in verse 22, Israel wanted Gideon to become their leader. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, you must rule over us, you and your sons sons, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. So I see here in the prophetic, it looks to me, it reminds me of you must rule over us, you, Gideon, and your son, and then your sons, those who follow your son. And this reminds me of Yahuwah, our Father in heaven. Yahuwah must rule over us. And Yahuwah's son must rule over us. And then the sons of Yeshua, because it's you, Abba, rule over us, your son, Yeshua, rule over us, and your sons after him rule over us forever. And if we read the Bible, we see that the saints of God in the last days after the resurrection and when the kingdom of Israel is finally restored, it does say that Yeshua rewards his servants, and he says, for instance, at one place, over a little you've been faithful, I will appoint you over much. And then he appointed him over many cities. And it also says that we will rule and reign with Messiah in the heavenly places. And there's all these other confirmations that says that Abba rules over us and Abba's son rules over us. And then when Abba and his son has finally subdued the enemy and has freed Israel from the enemy and has restored the kingdom of Israel, then Israel will be the kingdom on earth. And the sons of Yeshua, the Son of God, the sons and daughters will rule and reign with him. He's always the king. His father is the creator of heaven and earth. But as sons and daughters, the Bible talks about us being princes and princesses. It talks about a royal priesthood, royal, which means kingly. So yeah, it's just interesting for me to see how Israel here wants the Father, the Son, and the descendants of the Son to rule over us. But what does Gideon say? He confirms exactly what we see here in the prophetic. I will not rule over you, neither will my son rule over you. No, Yahuwah will rule over you. And by assumption, we then confirm the Lord will rule over you and his son, not me and my son. I absolutely love that. This is the heart that Gideon had. He went out and he fought so hard and he did everything according to what God commanded him. But he didn't want to be the leader of Israel, because Israel has a leader. Israel has a God. Israel has a king. In the same as in the times of Samuel. Samuel was the prophet and he was also the judge over Israel. And people came to him for judgment and for advice and for making decisions, because he was basically the voice of God. Because a prophet always gives the words of God to the people. And God spoke to Samuel and Samuel spoke to the people. And that was enough for Samuel. And when the people became, jealous that the surrounding nations had kings, they came to Samuel and they said, we also want a king. Just like all the people around us have kings, we want a king. So that he can go out before us in battle and he can rule us and he can lead us. We want a great man to be a king over us. And Samuel was extremely angry. And he went angry and frustrated and depressed to Yahuwah. And Yahuwah said, Samuel, don't stress. These people haven't rejected you, they have rejected me. Because in asking for a king and even asking for Gideon to become their ruler, they are basically disregarding the God who is already their ruler. And here the heart of Samuel was such. He could have easily become the ruler, lived in a palace and be rich and powerful the rest of his life, him and his son, and even his son's descendants. But he chose to be faithful to God. He chose to try and do his best for God. We'll see it just now in the next verse as well. And he rejected that. He said, why do you want me to be your ruler? Yahuwah is your ruler. You have a ruler. So don't stray away from your ruler you already have. He is the one that saved you. He's the one that gave Midian in our hands. So Gideon said to them, no, I will not rule over you because you have a ruler, that's Yahuwah. But I would like one thing of you though. If you can give me every man just the earrings of the enemy. Because that's how it worked in those days. You loot. Once you've subdued the enemy, once you've won the battle, you have the right to loot. You can then take all the valuable stuff of your enemy. So they normally took all the gold and the earrings that the people wore, and all the jewelry, and even the jewelry around the neck of the camels. And they took the clothes because, clothes were expensive. To weave the fabric and make the garments, that was a very tedious job, and clothes was always a very valuable gift. If we think about Samson, remember, when Samson went to that wedding and he gave that riddle to the people, it was that he would, as a reward, if the people could not solve the riddle, they must give him 30 garments. But if they did solve the riddle, then he will give them 30 garments. Because garments, clothes, robes and stuff was very valuable. So there was always this looting that happened. So all that Gideon asked for was for the earrings. Why? Because in verse 24, for the Midianites wore golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Very interesting. So Midian and all these other enemies that is standing up against Israel, or actually when you go down the line of descendants, they are Ishmaelites. So they wore golden earrings. If you look at all these old movies of the Arabian Nights, all these Arabian sheikhs and stuff, they all always wore quite thick golden earrings. And of course, as Midian was killed and destroyed, all these corpses were lying all over, and Israel took the earrings out of their ears. And there's, of course, a lot of other looting, a lot of other treasures that Israel took from the Midianites and the Amalekites. But Gideon doesn't want all of that. He says he only wants the earrings. He only wants a small piece of gold from every one of the enemies, and that will be his reward. He's not going to become the ruler. He's not wanting to become rich. He just wants this as a reward. And as we looked at Ishmael and Isaac many years ago when we studied Genesis, we always said to each other how it's so ironic. Out of the loins of the same father, out of Abraham's loins, comes the people of God and the biggest enemies of God as well. So, the descendants, the line, the blood, the genetics is always coming to play so interestingly. Continuing verse 26, and the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. So, it's quite a lot. He only asked for something small like an earring. The rest of the jewels and the looting and the treasures, the people could keep, the rest of the soldiers could keep for themselves. He only wanted a small part that was looted from every body of the enemy. But when you add all the small parts together, it came to quite a hefty treasure, 1,700 shekels of gold. But that was besides the ornaments, the colors, the purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and also besides the chains that were around the camels' necks. So there was quite a nice treasure they got from that. All right, here is where Gideon thought he was going to do something nice. He did so well up to now. He obeyed God. He led the people. Although he was afraid, we went through, his whole cycle of how God prepared him and made him a mighty warrior. Just as the angel said to him, you are a mighty warrior, and he didn't understand or believe it yet. But God took him through this process like he does with us. In the beginning, we don't believe we can even do anything for God. And eventually, he works his power, and he gives us the experience, and he takes us through testing, and it builds up our strength and our confidence and our faith. And eventually we are able to shine our lights and break the clay pots and blow the trumpets and blah, 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 blah. The whole process. But then sometimes you get to the point where you think you've now arrived, where you think you've now made it. You are the chosen of God. You can do mighty, great things for him. The moment you get to that point, I think maybe that's the point where Gideon got. He even proved himself by being so humble and by always directing the glory to Yahuwah. Even here when they wanted to make him king, and he said, no, Yahuwah is your king. He was still going through that process of being refined as gold and silver, becoming such a workable clay in the hands of the clay maker, in the hands of the potter. And here he's humbled so low that he still directs all the glory and honor back to Yahuwah, not taking any glory for himself. And in that process of how God used Gideon, he got to the point where he now received 1,700 shekels of gold. And maybe in his mind, maybe in his deep heart of hearts, he was hoping to do something nice for Yahuwah. So verse 27, he made an effort of the gold, and he put it in his city, even in Ophrah. So remember, he came from Ophrah. If we go back to where we started with Gideon, remember Ophrah, where the angel came to visit him. And Ophrah means, the town where there's like a deer panting for water. In Ophrah, and the angel came to meet him there. So here at the end of Gideon's journey, he goes back to Ophrah, and he takes the bait or the treasure that he got out of the battles, and he makes an ephod thereof. An ephod is like the golden breastplate that is normally worn by the high priest, remember? And this is now a good thing in his eyes. He's trying to remind people, we need to serve God. We need to glorify him through our priestly service to him. But out of his good intentions, I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have used the gold from the battle to make something for Yahuwah. Because look at how it turned back and bit him in the backside. This good intentions he had turned around. Maybe because God didn't tell him to do this. I don't know exactly what happened here, why he decided to make this thing. But it must have been something out of his fleshly nature. It must have been something maybe to show the people of Ophrah. Remember he was hiding in a cave. Remember when he destroyed the altars of Baal, how the whole city was standing up against him and told his father to bring him out so that they can kill him. And now maybe somewhere in his fleshly nature, something made him wanting to prove to the city of Ophrah that he was actually, a mighty soldier. And remember how you wanted to kill me when I destroyed Baal? But see, I'm actually just an ornament in the hand of Yahuwah. Yahuwah chose me to win the battle. I freed you from the oppression of the enemies. Now you've got peace and quiet. We'll get to that now. For 40 years again, just like so many of the other judges, whenever when the people returned to God, there was always 40 years of peace and quiet. Makes me think about a certain Hollywood woman recently that talked about only 44 people still speaking our Afrikaans language. She wasn't just a dumb blonde there was such a prophetic, occultic meaning in that utterance. It was deliberately used, 44. But anyway, that's another deep conversation. But yeah, Gideon, out of his good intentions and maybe a little bit of revenge, maybe wanting to prove to his father and his father's house and all the people in the city of his father, maybe he wanted to go back and prove, you guys were wrong, I was right, you should have listened to me. Look at this effort of 1,700 shekels of gold. Look at this amazing thing that God made through me because I won the battle. I obeyed God. You didn't obey God. I'm better than you. I don't know. Maybe that was the deep intentions of his heart. Maybe he wanted to make something nice for God, but the root, if you're really honest with yourself and you look at the roots of even your good intentions, if there's even a little bit of selfishness or greed or revenge or recognition or retribution, any of that in the roots of your good intentions, it's going to turn around like a snake and it's going to bite you in the heel. Because verse 27, he made the effort and he put it in his city, even in Ophrah, and all Israel went whoring after it. This thing became a snare unto Gideon and unto his house. And I want to ask, what did you think, Gideon? What did you think was going to happen with this golden effort? What did you think was going to happen when you make something, when you fashion something? Because he was from a tribe of Benjamin, he wasn't a Levite. Maybe it wasn't right for him to make an effort. He wasn't a Levite. He wasn't from the priestly tribe. He was just from Benjamin. And maybe that's where, if it was made, if anything with good intentions is made according to the law of God and in the will of God, it will remain holy. Like the serpent of bronze that Moses made in the wilderness. At that very moment, just in the physical, the bronze serpent had a specific function and it served the function. And also in the prophetic, it hugely prophesied Messiah. But once that was over, once the physical and the prophetic was done away with, years later, the bronze serpent became a snare. It became an idol. In the next generations, they started whoring after it. They bowed before it. They thought it had magic powers, and they used it as an idol. So even something that is valuable and productive in the hand of God can be so easily, what is the right word I'm looking for? So cleverly, deceivingly, can just be twisted so that it can actually pull away the people from God. Same with this whole Antichrist plan that that Lucifer has at the end of the day. He will be such an Antichrist, anti-Messiah. He will not be the opposite of Messiah, or he will be, but he won't look like the opposite. He will look like Messiah, speak, appear, sound. We will, the Bible says so many people will be deceived because it will be as if he, just like this golden effort, is for the glory of God. And yet it will turn people away from God. It looks like it's in the will of God, yet it will turn people away from God. The bronze serpent was used for amazing miracles in the wilderness, yet it didn't have magic power years later when they started worshipping it, because it turned them away from God. The serpent was supposed to lead them back to God, because God said he was the one that sent the poisonous serpents under the people because they were disobedient to him. So all they had to do was become obedient to him again. There was no magic power in the serpent. It was just to get people to obey God, do what he says, receive healing, and then turn back to him. The same with the ephod. Look upon the ephod. Look upon the breastplate of the high priest. See the 12 tribes of Israel and see how the high priest wears the 12 tribes when he goes into the most holy place on Yom Kippur. And turn back to God, come into His presence. Don't go whoring after the bronze serpent or after the ephod, because they are so very, very fine line between truth and deception, between truth and lies. And here again we see how it's described in what Gideon meant for good, unfortunately turned around and it made Israel to whore. Verse 28, so Midian was subdued before the children of Israel. They didn't lift up their heads against Israel anymore. And the country was in quietness and shalom for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Absolutely amazing. Gideon's name was also Jerubbaal. He was in opposition to Baal. And whenever the people of God is in opposition to Baal, we will have the messianic shalom in our lives. 40, 400, number 4 is all about the Messiah. It's all about the messianic prophecies. The 400 years, the 400 days on the mountain, Yeshua, the 40 days in the wilderness, all these 4 and 40 and 400, it's all messianic. So there was again messianic shalom for the people when they turned back to God. So Jerubbaal, or Gideon, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. So finally, when we go into the messianic millennium kingdom, the 1,000 years of peace, we will return to our original house, Bereshit. In the beginning, the house of covenant, Bereshit, the Brit, the covenant of the house, the Beit, the house of God. Because that is what Yeshua is. He's the way back to God. He's the one that will restore us back to our Creator. That is why we follow the Torah, which is the way, which is the light, which takes us back to God. And that's why the Torah had to become flesh, so that we can physically, if we struggle to follow the Torah, now it's easier because now the Torah became flesh and we can see the manifestation of God in the flesh. We can see how His word became flesh and we can follow Him. He just helps us. Yahuwah just helped us to see in Yeshua the way back to Him. Let's continue. Verse 30 of Judges chapter 8. And Gideon had 70 sons. So, 70 is 70 sons. In the Hebrew, that is normally times 3. And the score has got to do with 2. So 3 times 2. And then 10 sons. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 10 sons is 16. 70 sons that he came out of his body, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bore him a son. And he called his name Abimelech. My first problem I have is, out of the loins of Gideon, maybe with his chosen wife, should have come, his... Like his young son he had in the previous session we looked at. His name was Yether. He was Gideon's firstborn. So I would have supposed, even after Israel said to Gideon, you and your son rule over us, it should have been his firstborn, because that is how it works, the firstborn son. But if we look at chapter 9 of Judges, the conspiracy, the abomination of Abimelech, because Abimelech is now the son that Gideon had with the concubine, with a woman that wasn't his first chosen woman. And then Abimelech, the son from the concubine, wasn't his firstborn son. And this is where the problem started. Now, out of the genetic mixture, because the concubine is not a chosen wife. So obviously, I'm just assuming this. It doesn't necessarily say it, but I'm going to assume that the concubine was like a slave girl. And I'm going to assume that she wasn't a full-blooded Hebrew. And again, I hate it when this happens, because the people of God was not supposed to mix with the other nations. And yet here Gideon has a son with a concubine, not a full-blooded wife that he was married to according to the law. And that's where the problems now for Israel starts all over again. Because why? Let's read together. Now, just want to show you how the Antichrist is coming up and rearing his head up again, because the son of the concubine from Shechem, and you know what Shechem means. We've dealt with Shechem too many times to mention. So here, this woman is from Shechem, and this son is called Abimelech. Abimelech. Abba Melech. God is my king. God, my father, is my king. But unfortunately, there is another father and another king, and out of the mixed seed of this concubine and Gideon, where Gideon is Hebrew, the concubine is not, here comes the false king. And in chapter 9, we're going to now look at this false king. How the Antichrist again is prophesied, chapter after chapter. The Antichrist is not the king of the Amalekites or the king of Babylon or the king of this. No, it comes out of what is meant for holiness for God, and it just twists it that little bit. So it looks like Abimelech is from the loins of Gideon. So, he's a good choice. No, he's not. Gideon's firstborn was supposed to be the next in line, to be like a judge over Israel, not Abimelech. Abimelech was a false father king that now led them astray. So Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age, and he was buried in a sepulchre of Joash, his father, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went whoring after the Baalim, the Baals. And they made Baal Berith their god. Now, Baal, of course, means Lord, but the false Lord. Berith or Brit means covenant. So here, Israel, the moment Gideon died, and remember, Gideon's name was changed to Jerubbaal. Remember, in chapter 6, verse 32, because he was standing up against Baal. Chapter 6, verse 32. Remember, verse 32, therefore on that day they called him Jerubbaal, and they said, let Baal plead or fight against him, because he has thrown down his altar. So Jerubbaal meant Gideon and Baal was striving, because it means to strive against Baal. And here the moment Jerubbaal, the one who strives against Baal, the moment he's dead, they make Baal Berith their god. They now go and make a covenant with another Lord. Why on earth? God has just brought them out of the caves. God has just given them the most amazing victory. Why on earth? Please explain to me. I don't understand. And the children of Israel did not remember Yahuwah, their Elohim, who has delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither did they even show goodness or kindness to the house of Gideon, according to all that he did and all the goodness that he showed unto Israel. No, they chose to make a covenant with Baal. They chose to make Abimelech their king. And now we're going to see how Abimelech in chapter 9, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem unto his mother's brethren and communed with him. And we'll continue reading about that tomorrow. How this Antichrist prophetic figure out of the loins of this beautiful man Gideon, that was besides his fear and his lack of self-confidence, went and stood against Baal for the name of Yahuwah, and who even went into the enemy's camp even when he was afraid, and God made him hear even from the mouth of the enemy how scared they were of Yahuwah. And God built up this young man Gideon, who was hiding in a cave, who said his family is the poorest in the small tribe of Benjamin, and he himself is the worst of all his family, and how God made him the judge over Israel. For 40 years there was peace in the country. Why on earth did Israel forget Gideon? Why did they forget his son? Just a few years ago they wanted his son to rule over them. Why didn't they show any kindness to Gideon? And why did they forget Yahuwah the Elohim? This is the problem we have when Baal is still around. Gideon destroyed all the altars, but he couldn't destroy the altar that was built in the fleshly nature of us human beings, because we ate the serpent's words, the seed of the serpent, the Baal, the false god seed that is still grown their roots so deep in humanity. And that is why Yeshua is the tree of life, because there's nothing good under the tree of knowledge. Even if something looks good, it's still the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because the roots of that tree is in the serpent's kingdom, in the fleshly nature that we inherited the moment we were disobedient to God, and we took that seed inside of us by eating that forbidden fruit. And that root can only be destroyed by the fire of God. God will destroy that tree and its root with fire. And that's why it's important for the children of God to be tested by fire. That's what the tribulation is all about. That is what the persecution in every generation has been about. The testing of fire, the refiner's fire, the persecution that will wash the garments clean of those people who follow God, because those roots has to be destroyed. And then Paul describes it beautifully in Romans 7, that while we are in these fleshly bodies, we fight against those roots, but we will never really destroy them. We fight against them, and it feels like a losing battle, Paul says. The good that I want to do, I don't do it. And the bad that I don't want to do, that I do. How will I survive? What can I do? And then he says, but thanks be to Yahuwah, who makes it possible and who gives us salvation and grace and mercy through Yeshua, so that now with my flesh, yes, I obey the law of sin and death, but Yeshua, through the Spirit, through the burning fire of Shavuot, helps us to follow the law of God and makes us free from the law of sin and death. So that, Romans chapter 8, we are now free from the law of sin and death, and nothing can separate us from the love of God. But we fight against these roots that's in our fleshly nature as human beings, up to the point of 1 Corinthians 15, where this corruptible body will just disappear, and God will give us his incorrupted, original body that he meant for us to have when we return back to covenant with him in the Garden of Eden, the body that Adam and Eve had. But up to then, this false god, this Abimelech, this Baal Berith, this people of Shechem, in the valley of decisions, our fleshly dark nature will always jump up. That's why Paul says, crucify myself daily, die to myself daily, because this is the battle we will have all the way to the end. And we can never get to the point where we can say the battle is over, and we can take the 1,700 shekels of gold and make an ephod and think we're going to just be resting for 40 years. No, that will only happen when Messiah finally finishes the last battle and brings in the real Abimelech, so that Father Yahuwah himself will be our king and live with us and be our God, and we can be his people. Thank you, Gideon, for being so obedient so many thousands of years ago, so that we can learn from you, learn by you, learn through you. And thank you, Father, for teaching us through the life of Gideon, Jerubbaal. May Yahuwah be with us, even when Israel, even when your own people forgets you and doesn't show kindness to the descendants of Jerubbaal today still, that wants to strive against Baal and bring the glory and the rulership of Yahuwah back to the people. No man shall rule over you, because Yahuwah is your ruler.